Thank you. And finally, we'll hear from Mrs. Tammy Nobles. Ms. Nobles, you've already heard from several of our colleagues. Our hearts go out to you, as do the hearts of every American who hears your story. I know that grief always feels very alone, but I want to assure you you're not alone, and you're now recognized to tell your story.
Thank you to the members of the committee for having me. My name is Tammy Nobles. I am the mother of Kayla Hamilton. July 24th, 2002 was one of the best days of my life. I gave birth to a beautiful baby girl and named her Kayla Marie. She was a happy and easygoing baby. Even back then, she loved to smile and laugh. She always kept her friends close and never forgot anyone. She was kind, caring, thoughtful, and funny. She loved life and God. She showed the world that being yourself was okay, and you didn't have to follow everyone else. But sadly, on July 27th, 2022, I received the worst news that a parent doesn't want to hear, that my newly 20-year-old daughter, Kayla Hamilton, was murdered in her own room and left on the floor like trash. She left behind a mother who loved her, a stepfather, a brother, a younger sister, grandparents, and lots of aunts, uncles, and cousins. At first, we knew very little details of the murder until an arrest was made. The details we learned broke us. At the end of March of 2022, Kayla's murderer was apprehended by Border Patrol crossing illegally into the U.S. at the southwest border in Rio Grande City, Texas. I am not sure if he was vetted or not, but he was a 16-year-old known gang member affiliated with MS-13 in El Salvador. The MS-13 motto is kill, rape, and control. He entered the country as an unoccupied alien child. As a UAC, the murderer was allowed to go live with his aunt in Frederick, Maryland. She was also an illegal immigrant. There were issues with him living there, and he went to go live with his half-brother who lived in the same trailer park as Kayla and her boyfriend. My questions are, what protocol was the aunt supposed to follow? If she couldn't handle him, then why not inform the proper authorities? The half-brother tried to get him a job and to do the right thing, but that didn't happen. So the half-brother told him that he had to leave. At the trailer park, an illegal immigrant owned numerous trailers and was subletting them out. That is how Kayla was able to get a place, because she didn't make much and had no credit yet. The half-brother asked the owner if she had any rooms for rent. She did. The same trailer as Kayla. Kayla's murderer was living there less than 5 days before he viciously murdered my daughter. Kayla had 2 jobs. She was working at a cleaning company and at a grocery store. Kayla had autism, but she was determined to live independently and make her way in this world. And my baby paid the ultimate price. She had just gotten home from work, working the night shift, and said goodbye to her boyfriend that morning when he left for work. She then went to sleep. The murderer went into Kayla's room, strangling her, grabbed her iPod charger and wrapped it around her throat and face while strangling her to death. Kayla grabbed her phone and called her boyfriend, but went to voicemail. The voicemail of the murderer strangling her was 2 minutes and 30 seconds long. The murderer then violently sexually assaulted Kayla. Kayla's boyfriend came home from work and found her dead on the floor. The charger cord was so tight around her neck and face that her boyfriend had to use his teeth to get it off. The murderer robbed her of her phone and $6. $6 is all my baby had in cash, because she used the snack machines at work to get something to eat. He then went to lunch with his half-brother like nothing happened. Local police didn't have enough evidence to arrest the murderer, so Child Protective Services took him into custody and placed him in an unsecured children's home with other children, even knowing that he was the main suspect in a premeditated murder case. When he was arrested for Kayla's murder, he laughed and smirked. For me, this is not a political issue. This is a safety issue for everyone living in the United States. This could have been anyone's daughter. Kayla wasn't doing anything wrong, and she didn't deserve to be murdered. I don't want any other parent to live the nightmare that I am living. I am her voice now. and I'm going to fight with everything I have to get her story told and bring awareness of the issue at the border. I will make sure her memory lives on. Murder itself is already taboo, but then you mention MS-13 and nobody wants to touch it. Nothing will change if nobody talks about the problem. The United States government has to secure our border. We need to properly vet all border crossers. The government could have placed a phone call to authorities in El Salvador and found out that he was a gang member, but they didn't. If we had stricter border policies, my daughter would still be alive today. Nothing will bring my daughter back, nor the pain, nor fix the pain. I'm not having her here, but I want to prevent this from happening to someone else's child. This is about protecting everyone here in the United States. Thank you.
We'll now proceed with the 5-minute rule with questions. I'm going to defer mine to the end and recognize Mr. Biggs of Arizona.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Nobles, thank you again for being here. Thank all the witnesses, but thank you for your poignant testimony. I think of Steve Ronnebeck, whose son Grant was murdered as he worked at a convenience store in Mesa, Arizona, by an illegal alien. Or Marianne Mendoza, whose son Brandon, as a police officer, was killed by an illegal alien in Mesa, Arizona. Our heart goes out to you, Mrs. Nobles. I'm stunned that a witness would say we need to find equilibrium at a time when 6 million plus people have illegally entered the country in the last 2 years. I'm stunned. I'm stunned to know that of 32,000 people, 21,000 of them were released into the country over a 72 to 96-hour period. I'm stunned because we don't have control of our border. The CBP Chief Ortiz has testified that the cartels control our border, as has Sector Chief Modlin of the Tucson sector, as has Sector Chief Chavez of the Rio Grande Valley sector. I'll go to you, Chief Scott. Has Secretary Mayorkas taken the actions necessary and appropriate to achieve and maintain operational control of the borders?
Absolutely not, sir. If you listen to the words he states every time, it's about creating safe pathways. When I was chief, we were not allowed to even discuss consequences or actually securing the border. It was all about expediting the processing and avoiding the optics of people backed up into Border Patrol stations.
We've heard today about new parole processes being implemented. Last year, over 300,000 people received parole. This year, it'll be over 750,000. Prior to the Biden administration, typically you might see 15 to 20, maybe 20, as high as 25 parole processes. That's because that's an individual process. Even Secretary Mayorkas has testified before this committee that it's an individual process. What has he done to distort the parole process, Chief Scott?
I honestly do not understand how they can look at the law and do what they're currently doing with the parole process. By law, every one of those approvals is supposed to be a case-by-case basis. It's supposed to be based on humanitarian reason or a benefit to the United States government. In my entire time in the Border Patrol, I probably approved, and I'm estimating, about 6 or 8 paroles a year at the most, and those were usually to benefit a case or because of some type of a medical condition. But there were tight restrictions put on every one of those. There's probably a packet about 1 inch thick about keeping track of the individual, because the concept of parole is you're allowing someone into the United States that we know does not have a legal right to be here. They haven't proven it, so we're accepting risk on behalf of all of America. That's a heavy burden. We all took that very seriously. I do not believe the Border Patrol can be doing today the legal assessment required for each individual case. It's just not possible.
Chief Scott, DHS officials, and I'm quoting now from a New York Times piece, say thousands of migrants are successfully using CBP-1 instead of paying smugglers, close quote. Are we to believe that CBP-1 is an alternative to cartel smuggling, or are we actually using CBP-1 to facilitate cartel smuggling?
There's CBP-1 app is, from my understanding, is basically a queuing mechanism like we used to do at ports of entry with a pen and paper on the south side. Anything that happens on the south side of that border is definitely controlled or influenced heavily by the cartel. Anything we can do to get them out of the system would be fine, but I think the piece that we're missing here too is we're now taking away from the legal trade and travel processes of the CBP officers at those ports of entry. They were all gainfully employed prior, and the CBP-1 app is pushing more and more people into that port of entry that don't have, by definition, do not have a legal right to be here. The other challenge is it's a magnet. Because to use the CBP-1 app, again, from my understanding, you have to be in Mexico, you have to be up close to the border. So that entices even more people into that border community, and the throughput does not match the demand. And where does that overage go? Right back to the cartels.
Thank you. My time's expired.
Chair now recognizes the ranking member for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Hatfield, thank you for your very compelling testimony. As you know, one of the Biden administration's answers to increased migration at the border is to expand legal pathways. As Title 42 was set to expire earlier this month, the United States announced its opening of regional processing centers all over the hemisphere. They will be starting in Guatemala and Colombia, and then expanding to other countries, including Mexico. This seems like a positive step by the administration to build up its capacity to take increased numbers of refugees before they ever even make that dangerous journey to our southern border. Would you agree with that? And what do you think the United States needs to do to make these regional processing centers a success?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. I mean, I also agree with Chief Scott's assessment about the overuse of parole. The administration needs to rely more on the U.S. Refugee Admissions Program as a lawful pathway, with a pathway to permanent residence and ultimately citizenship and suitable vetting, and less on humanitarian parole. And this is definitely a step in the right direction. So I hope those centers are resourced. One of the key strategies that's going to have to be implemented, though, is you have to make those centers for asylum seekers with legitimate claims more attractive than crossing the border to seek asylum. So you have to look at things that have been used in the past with the refugee program, like the Lautenberg Amendment, and apply that to their applications. You have to make sure that that their applications are processed expeditiously and fairly. So yes, but I'm absolutely supportive of that measure.
If you listen to my colleagues, you would think that the United States is bearing the brunt of the global refugee crisis alone. HIAS works all over the world, as you said. It's simply not true. Can you discuss how other countries in the hemisphere are seeing significant increases in the number of asylum claims?
Yeah, absolutely. And it really is a global refugee crisis, and we are just one player in this global refugee crisis. I mean, Colombia alone, which was traditionally a refugee-producing country, is now taking in refugees. Millions of Venezuelans, over 2.5 million Venezuelans have sought refuge in Colombia, where HIAS operates. Likewise, over 1.5 million in Peru, over 500,000 in Ecuador. Over nearly 500,000 in Chile. I mean, if you look at every single country in the hemisphere, there are many asylum seekers, most of them coming from Venezuela, but also from Central America and even outside of the Western Hemisphere seeking asylum. And so this really requires international attention, and the U.S. has to lead on this issue.
And it's my understanding that HIAS is actually helping some of these individuals apply for asylum in other countries. Can you tell us more about that?
Sure. I mean, HIAS's number one job is to make asylum seekers safe and secure and welcome wherever they are. And that's in the first countries to which they flee. And when that fails, then we try to find them third countries, but again, through safe and orderly means like refugee resettlement. Our operations have expanded massively over the last few years because of the refugee crisis and the Venezuelan migration crisis in particular throughout the Western Hemisphere.
And as you pointed out, refugee admissions and the need to assist refugees has always been a bipartisan concern until recently. In fact, I remember the testimony of somebody from the National Evangelical Association saying that our refugee resettlement program is the crown jewel of humanitarian assistance. Mr. Hatfield, I wanted to see if you could discuss misinformation and how it spreads among migrants who are making the long journey to the border. Can you discuss how rumors and misinformation spread by the cartels of an open border impacts the number of migrants that we see trying to come to the United States?
Sure, and it's massive, but it's not all misinformation. I mean, they're spreading misinformation and also information about how broken our border and our immigration system is. And that is an attractant to people to come in, to apply for asylum and other benefits to which many of them are not actually entitled.
Thank you, Mr. Hatfield. I couldn't agree more. I think our words matter, and I think that you're pointing out of the importance of really establishing a functioning immigration system is absolutely crucial. As the ranking member of the full committee said in his opening statement, it is unfortunately seen as an advantage by many of our colleagues across the aisle to leave our immigration system broken so that we can continue to point fingers at immigrants who are simply trying to do what so many of our forebearers have done, come to the United States because it is a country that has protected so many people fleeing terrible persecution and many other ills. I thank you for your testimony today and for being with us. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
The chair recognizes Mr. Tiffany from Wisconsin for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chief Scott, isn't it correct that many of these people are not asylum seekers, that they're actually not legitimate asylees?
That is very accurate. Most of them, when you ask them questions, they're economic refugees. If anything, they're seeking work.
Isn't it correct when Remain in Mexico was in place under the previous administration, there was over 90% that rejected they were not legitimate asylees?
That is correct, and that also acted as a deterrent, so people stopped coming to the border because they knew they couldn't get away with fraud.
Yeah, just for the record, Mr. Chairman, I was down at the Darien Gap 2 years ago at this time in May, and that's exactly what we heard. People were coming. They were like, we had resettled to Chile, and we were perfectly happy there. We resettled to Brazil, Haitians, others, Venezuelans. They said, we were perfectly happy there, but since you're going to open the border, we're going to come to the United States of America. That's not a legitimate asylum claim, is it?
That is not.
With Secretary Mayorkas, has he done his job to protect the American people?
I do not believe that he has. He's focused on the processing and completely ignored border security, which, by the way, actually decimates our immigration system. Good border security supports our good immigration system.
Mrs. Nobles, if border policies continue as they are over the last 2 years, will there be more Kaylas?
Yes, I believe so. And that is why I'm trying to get her story out so people are aware of the issue.
Might Kayla be alive if the Biden administration had secured the border over the last 2 years?
Yes, I believe she would still be here if he was properly vetted.
Would you prefer from us, if you had a choice, to get condolences from members, which I'm sure are very heartfelt, would you prefer condolences or would you prefer changes in the law like the Secure the Border Act?
I would like to have changes in the law, and I want to put a law in Kayla's name to help, to have her memory live on, and to those who will know that she was the one that could, that changed the law.
Unfortunately, Mr. Chairman, we have a name for these people, angel families, and that is a horrible thing here in America that we have such a thing, that we have to name all those people that have been killed by people who came in here illegally into our country. I want to go back to you, Mr. Scott. Have you had a chance to see the grand jury presentment in Florida? Have you reviewed that?
I have not reviewed it in its entirety, no.
Would it surprise you, out of that presentment, a 24-year-old male was processed by the Office of Refugee Resettlement and went on to violently kill his sponsor by stabbing him 50 times? Would it be surprised that that person came in as a minor but actually was a 24-year-old male? Is that surprising to you?
It is not surprising. I'm familiar with that case. There's no database that we can check people's ages off of, so you have to go with their word.
Would you be surprised out of that presentment that many don't carry any form of identification or authentic IDs?
I'm not surprised. Usually they get rid of it before they cross the border.
Are you surprised that UAC's unaccompanied alien children are not rapid DNA tested or biometric tested?
To be honest, they're not even fingerprinted and photographed in many occasions if they're under 14, so no.
Would you be surprised to know out of that presentment that most case managers at OR do not have any special training, and many have been hired over the phone, sight unseen, with a very cursory approach?
That's very troubling, but unfortunately I'm not surprised.
Would you be surprised that agents in the El Paso region discovered more than 665 adult illegal aliens in 2021 alone who tried to pose as unaccompanied minors to gain expedited entry into the United States in the past 12 months?
I'm not surprised. Anytime you carve out a special group, people try to take advantage of that and lie and get into it.
Would you be surprised if an OR attorney, the Office of Refugee and Resettlement, stated, we only get sued for keeping them too long. We don't get sued by traffickers.
I'm not surprised, and that is consistent with what I was told and heard during my time as chief in this administration.
Thank you to all the people that are here today. I would just close. We heard all kinds of data from the ranking member here in his presentation. Over the course of 3 decades, I believe it added up to about 233,000 people came in via parole. That was over the course of 3 decades. We've had over 1 million people come in, Mr. Chairman, in just a little over 2 years. That is not humane in any way. Terrorists, human traffickers, and fentanyl poisonings are a product of what has happened under the Biden administration and Secretary Mayorkas. I yield.